fill in some background to the Abbey before we go in. We're standing in the cloisters, so this is where the monks would have studied, where they would have spent their leisure time. And there were monks here until the Reformation. So the first church was built on the site was 960 AD, founded by St Dunstan. And in 1042, King Edward the Confessor of England decided that he would rebuild the church. And the reason for this is that he had been in exile for a little while, and he asked the Pope, he promised the Pope that if his kingdom was restored, then he would go on pilgrimage to Rome. But when his kingdom was restored, he was too busy to go on the pilgrimage to Rome. So he asked the Pope, could I build a great abbey instead? And the Pope said, yes, that's okay. So that's what he did, and he built a Norman-style abbey on the site of this one. It's more or less the same size as the present abbey, but it had rounded arches in the Norman style. Then in 1245, King Henry III was known as the Builder King. He also built at the Tower of London, at Windsor Castle. He decided to rebuild the Abbey. He had three reasons for doing this. One was that he wanted to make a very grand church for himself and his family to be buried. The second reason was that he wanted to have a very grand coronation church. And the third reason was that he wanted to make a shrine for King Edward the Confessor. Because King Edward the Confessor, who built the previous abbey, he had been made a saint after his death. There had been supposed miracles at his grave, and he was supposed to have lived an exemplary holy life, and so those were the criteria in those days for someone being made a saint. So the Pope made him a saint, and they wanted to have a grand abbey to make a shrine to him because that meant pilgrims. And of course, pilgrims were very important in the medieval church because it meant money for the church. So though there was an element of people paying their respects to the saint and hoping that the saint would appeal to God before them, because up until the Reformation they believed that saints would do this. At the Reformation since the Reformation, the Protestants believed that Christ is the only intermediary between us and God, so it wasn't necessary to pray to saints anymore. So at the Reformation all the shrines were ripped out, although in fact the shrine to Edward the Confessor does remain in the Abbey here because he was also a king. That's the reason. So everything was going fine for the Abbey until the 1530s and the Reformation. And it'd been, well, how many days? 10 days on the Reformation term. So, all about the Reformation, I guess. Do I need to say anything? Well, for me, the Reformation is all about the struggle to get the Bible translated into English. All the disputes about doctrine descend from that. Essentially, the Reformers wanted the Bible in English so that people could test God's truth in the Bible against what the priest was saying. Get the Bible back at the centre of worship, get preaching back at the centre of worship, as opposed to rituals. But it's also true, we have to admit, that the Reformation was given a boost by the fact that King Henry VIII wanted to divorce his first wife, Catherine of Aragon and Marie-Anne Boleyn. I'm sure you've heard the story already, right? He asked the Pope for a divorce, the Pope says no. So he says, right, plan B, I will make myself head of the church in England then, and the country Protestant, so that's what happened. And it's only actually in the reign of the next king, Edward VI, that we get true Protestant doctrine in our church. But it opened the way for the reformers to start to really push through their reforms in terms of doctrine. It also changed things at the Abbey here, because it meant that the monastery was closed down. King Henry VIII saw that the monasteries all had a lot of money because they all had huge flocks of sheep, lots of money from wool. That was where the money came from in the medieval times in this country. And King Henry VIII was at war with France, as is often the case in our history, as you will have noticed probably after your tour here. So King Henry VIII thought, right, if I close down the monasteries, I can have their wealth, I can sort out this war. So the monastery was closed down here. It's also because they had a different style of worship now. They didn't need so many priests. They didn't have all the different chantry chapels where masses had to be said anymore. So technically, this is not actually an abbey because there haven't been any monks here since 1534. It's also not a cathedral because it doesn't have a cathedra, which is a seat for a bishop, which is the criteria for something to be called a cathedral. The Bishop of London is at St Paul's, or the Bishop of Southwark, but we have St Paul's in the north of London, Southwark for the south of the Thames. It is, however, a little peculiar, this church. That is because the Pope in medieval times made it papal peculiar, so it's under control directly of the Pope when it was Roman Catholic, not under the control of the Archbishop or the bishops. And that continued after the Reformation, but of course not under the control of the Pope, now under the control of the King. So that is why this church still does not come under the control of the Archbishop or any bishops, but under the control of the Dean and Chapter, who run the day-to-day running of it, and then the Dean and Chapter are responsible to the sovereign. And it is architecturally also a fantastic church. You've seen the Gothic style already because you've been to York Minster, so you know pointed arches. But we can see three different styles of Gothic architecture in the Abbey, which is the complete range of Gothic styles that we have. So we have here, with the thin, narrow windows, the lancet windows. This is the early English style. And then we move on to what we call the decorated style, where you've got the more elaborate tracery in the windows here. And then at the end of the tour, when we go to Henry VII's chapel, we will see what's called the particular style of architecture. So shall we go inside? I have to ask you, please, not to take photographs once you're in the nave. It's okay here, get in the nave.